Social etiquette, doing the right thing at the right time to relieve, to manage anxiety, to empower the individual, and then maybe later on belief will accompany that.
In front of the shrine entrance, and on each side of the walkways to the main shrine, there will be many vendors selling food, trinkets and souvenirs. Many lights will be strung about and lit in the evening. There may be live or recorded music as well. Huge numbers of people throng to these shrines. They often are so many that police are necessary to control the crowd. The earliest written records of kami are the works entitled the Kojiki, written in 712, and the Nihon Shoki, written in 720. These two works are similar to many other mythological writings and scriptures in that they begin with tales of creation. The Japanese works first focus on the activities of many kami, and then shift to historical accounts of emperors and their dynasties. The Kojiki gives the most purely Japanese version of ancient mythology, painting a picture of heaven and earth coming forth out of a watery and unformed substance. The Nihon Shoki interweaves Japanese mythology with Chinese philosophical notions that are used to interpret the creation. Some early passages of the Nihon Shoki refer to the Chinese concept of yin and yang, that is, the negative and positive, or the female and the male. Ancient Japanese beliefs and practices were first influenced by the Chinese sometime around 500 CE. At this time, the ancient beliefs in the kami and other beliefs as well were reinterpreted along Chinese lines. The foremost of these kami are the divine couple Izanami and Izanagi, who are responsible for much of creation, and the sun goddess Amaterasu, from whom the imperial line is descended. The Kojiki and Nihon Shoki are the earliest known writings on ancient Japanese mythology, and they are important records of Japan's ancient beliefs. But they are not considered to be scriptures, like the Bible in Christianity or the Vedas in Hinduism. Shinto priests and thinkers do grant them a sacred status, but most Japanese people regard them as imaginative or fanciful writings. In other words, legendary materials rather than scriptural authorities.
Shinto has a very pragmatic part to it, especially in the ritual context, where the deity can be called upon to be present. But of course, the deity can manifest itself at any time and in any place. So there is always that unpredictable, spontaneous aspect to the Shinto deity, which may manifest itself as a typhoon, or as a bolt of lightning, or as a clap of thunder, or as a river that goes out of control. Likewise, it may manifest itself as sun or rain when it's most needed, and when it's most beneficial to the people, to the crops that are being grown, or to the animals also.
Japanese beliefs and practices go back many centuries before they were first written down in the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki. And what we see in later Shinto is not necessarily the same as what existed in prehistoric times. Shrine buildings and even the word Shinto itself were not found in the prehistoric period. Only when new religious traditions entered Japan was there a need to distinguish the native Japanese religious heritage from other traditions. We saw in the Nihon Shoki how Japan's indigenous notions of creation and the birth of many kami became blended with the Chinese notion of yin and yang. There was no attempt to choose between an indigenous Japanese version and a Chinese interpretation. The Japanese instead simply combined the Japanese and Chinese traditions. The same kind of interaction occurred between Shinto and Buddhism. Initially, there was some friction between the way of the Buddha and the way of the kami, but over time they have blended in many ways. Indeed, Buddhism had blended with native beliefs and practices throughout Asia, and this pattern continued in Japan. In Japan, a Buddhist divinity came to be considered the original divine essence. and a corresponding kami was seen as a manifestation of this original essence. It was as if a Buddhist divinity was one side of a coin with a kami on the opposite side of the coin. And this was the rationale for worshipping Buddhas and kami in the same ritual setting. To people from the monotheistic traditions of Judaism, Christianity and Islam, this blending of deities may seem strange. The monotheistic ideal is to worship and maintain faith in the one true God. And a person belongs to or participates in only one religious tradition. Yet throughout most of Asia in general, and within Japan in particular, the dominant pattern is what we may call multiple affiliation. Here, someone participates in more than one religious tradition. People and even priests may celebrate two or more traditions during the same ritual, or they may alternate between one or more religions. In Japan, most people have participated in both Shinto and Buddhism. It was an exception when a few people, especially Shinto priests, limited their religious participation only to Shinto. In general, Shinto was overshadowed by Buddhism for more than 1,000 years. But through the ages, some learned Japanese insisted that Shinto was the original and true religion of the Japanese. Many of these arguments that Shinto is Japan's original and true religious heritage came to fruition in the writings of the 18th century scholar Moto Ori. Moto Ori says that Japan, the kami, the emperor and Shinto were created as one seamless unity. Kami do not stand outside the world and create it, but rather are part of the process through which the world gradually emerges. The kami also are not exclusively a force for good. In Christianity, the one true God is considered to be all good, and evil enters the world through human sin. But in Shinto, both humans and kami can be evil.
This aspect of benevolence that the kami can impart, and also destructiveness in the way that a kami can exert its power upon the natural world and upon human societies, we shouldn't think this as being in opposition to each other. We should think about it as a kind of complementarity between these powerful benevolent forces and the destructive forces, because as religions recognized very early on, it's this complementarity that allows for progression and allows for change.
The importance of birth and growth also is reflected in Japanese beliefs about the world and its place between the heavens and the underworld. The ancient Japanese believed that Japan was related to the heavens. It was a good country that was to be ruled by the descendants of the sun goddess in one unbroken line for ages eternal. Muraoka writes that the heavens, which are called the transcendent realms of the plane of high heaven, were believed to have a real world quality. The underworld, called Yomi, also was thought to be real.
It's important to keep in mind that even though we have this notion of deities in Shinto kami that come down from heaven, the high plane of heaven, to the earthly plane, we shouldn't think about them as being supernatural or somehow above or divorced from the natural world, because these deities are very much a part of the way things operate in the natural world. One of the qualities of the Shinto kami is that they come and they go. They do not reside in this world. It's often said that Shinto is a nature religion, and that the deities reside in trees or in waterfalls or in rocks. The priests certainly say that these deities come and go, that they can be called upon to come down from heaven, and then they can be sent off. Because the last thing you want is some powerful, unpredictable deity hanging around your rice fields and having to always take care of that very important celestial visitor.
A basic principle of Shinto is that life inevitably involves a tension between the pure and impure. The goal of life should be to maximize purity. In this way, one becomes close to the auspicious kami and receives their blessing. A human body is seen to be good, and yet it creates waste, which is impure. The body must be purified when it approaches the kami. The Japanese think of purification in a way that somewhat resembles ancient Israelite ritual practices, and their concepts of pollution and purification have little in common with Christian teachings about sin and redemption. In Christianity, sin means the willful turning away from God. When the Christian sinner asks forgiveness, he or she seeks to be redeemed through God's grace, thus being restored to a loving relationship with God. But in Shinto, pollution is not necessarily caused by disobeying or turning against the kami. It can be what modern people would consider a natural or accidental condition or event. Ritual purification is essential preparation for any Shinto worship. A Shinto priest first recites a stylized prayer of purification that incorporates the themes of the Izanagi myth. The pollution is understood to be corrected by exorcism, which drives out the impurity both through physical cleansing and through the power of the kami. Just as the body must be physically pure in order to worship, there also must be serenity and sincerity in one's heart. Physical pollution is the most obvious kind of impurity, but Shinto theoreticians also emphasize the ethical and spiritual dimensions of purity. Kami and purification are central to Shinto. The places where kami are worshipped are shrines, and the persons who lead the formal worship are priests. The two most important buildings are the sanctuary, called a honden, and hall of worship, or haiden. The sanctuary enshrines the kami. Physical representations of kami, such as statues, are very rare. Usually, the kami's presence is symbolized by an object such as a mirror. A kami often is considered to reside in an ancient treasure which is not shown to the public. In the hall of worship, ceremonies are performed by Shinto priests. Ordinary people usually climb the steps to this hall, and they present their offerings and prayers outside without approaching the sanctuary. Since early historic times, most formal Shinto worship has taken place at jinja, in other words, at shrines, sometimes without any benefit of clergy. But there always have been some religious specialists within Shinto. Shinto has never had a universal hierarchical order of priesthood, such as that within Roman Catholicism, and the training, practice, and ranking of Shinto officials have varied considerably. Today, there are various offices and ranks for the priests who recite prayers and perform rituals in Shinto ceremonies. The shrine priests, most directly responsible for rituals, are called kannushi, literally meaning divine master. There are no official rites for becoming a Shinto priest, as there are for Buddhist or Christian priests. In some rural settings, male heads of families traditionally take turns serving as Shinto priests at their local shrine. Male priests